Dre Baldwin with DreAllDay.com. I told you I was going to do this video in conjunction with my recap of the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, really talking about the Eastern Conference and Western Conference finals previews. I was going to talk about my hometown, Philadelphia 76ers, who came up short again and lost in the second round again in the playoffs again with a flop of a performance, a pathetic performance in Game 7 in Boston against the Celtics after they were up 3-2 and they blew this series. So several things we need to discuss here. First of all, let's start with the easy one. Doc Rivers, the coach, he just recently got fired. We knew he was going to get fired. This is what happens in basketball. The team falls short. Can't fire the players because they got guaranteed contracts. The coach's contract is guaranteed too. I mean, they got to pay them, but at least you can just fire the coach, pay him off, and then hire a new coach was what the Sixers, I guess, will have to do. They fired Doc Rivers. Was it Doc Rivers' fault? Does he play a role in this? Yes, he does, because he didn't make enough adjustments. They were up 3-2, and Doc Rivers has blown more leads in playoff series than any coach in NBA history. I heard somebody say that or read somebody say that. So Doc Rivers, he earned getting fired. I mean, that's going to happen. He got fired same way that the Milwaukee Bucks coach got fired, same way that Monty Williams over in Phoenix. I don't know if he deserved to get fired, but he got fired. This is what happens in basketball. They fire the coaches. You can't fire the players. All right, so that's enough about Doc Rivers. Now let's get to the players, which is much more important, because I once heard someone say that when you're assessing a coach, if the team loses by 10 points or less in basketball, you blame the coach, because there are some adjustments they could have made that would have made a difference. Team loses by more than 10 points, you blame the players. So that means the players just didn't damn show up. Sixers got blown out in Game 7 because they didn't show up. And this is a challenge. It's not even a challenge. This is a problem. The reason this is a problem is because the Sixers have two players who have MVP awards. These are players who like to talk about their stats. They like to campaign for awards. And then when it comes time to do something that they're supposed to do, like winning games for the team, they don't show up. James Harden and Joel Embiid. First of all, let's start with James Harden. James Harden is a guy who was in Houston for several years. Everything was built around him. Everything was catered to him. He put up amazing stats, had some great games, great stat lines, did all his stuff, won an MVP award. And in the playoffs, this dude continually choked. Most specifically, that year that they had Golden State down 3-2 and they blew that lead, James Harden couldn't get the job done. And this is one of those years James Harden was putting up crazy stats, putting up triple doubles and scoring 30, 40 points. Nobody could guard him one-on-one. He's doing all his stuff and all of that. They had the Warriors down 3-2. They could not finish the deal, and James Harden couldn't get it done. And that has to go on his resume. He could not get the job done. That goes on James Harden's resume. So that's one thing. He was doing that all those years in Houston. Then there was a year when he was campaigning for the MVP, the year that he and Russell Westbrook were like the two guys. That was the year Russell had the triple-double. Russell ended up winning the MVP. Then there was a year he did win it. Then there was a year when Giannis was coming up, and Giannis ended up winning. And James Harden he said this in an interview he was doing. He said, well, you know, what I do, because they asked him how do you compare himself to Giannis. He said, well, what I do, it takes real skill. You know, look what I'm doing. It takes real skill to do what I do. This guy, he's just running up and down the court and just using his size and just dunking on people and just driving to the rim. That doesn't take any real skill. My stuff takes real skill. That's a ridiculous thing to say, because the skill in basketball is not how many times you dribble or if you're shooting a three or if you're doing a step back or a crossover. The skill is winning the game. On offense is putting the ball in the basket. Defense stopping the other guy from doing it. And at the end of the game, having more points. Those are the only skills that matter in basketball. So this whole skill conversation was started by players who don't win, who want to try to make themselves seem more important than they are because they're not winning. So they got to change the conversation to something that they can be right about, which ain't winning and losing, because they're losing when it matters. And this was, I think, the person who's most famous for this, the person I heard most talking about it was Gilbert Arenas, a guy who never really competed as far as winning. He was never in the conversation. James Harden was in the conversation. He just didn't do it. He just didn't win. Now, so then James Harden he quits on Houston. He quit. He did not get traded he did get traded, but Houston didn't just say we want out of the James Harden business. No, James Harden quit on Houston. He quit. He said, we've done everything we can do here. I don't see, how much further we can go. We need to do something else. It's time to do other things. He quit. Now, if you could go and find that press conference, it was a press conference. He said it, talking to the media. He basically waved the white flag that he didn't want to play in Houston anymore. Houston obliged, because this is what they do with players these days. Players basically quit, so they trade them. And so many players have done this. Kevin Durant quit on Brooklyn. He got traded, so a lot of players quit. So this is not a new thing for James Harden to quit. He's one of many players to quit. thing about James Harden is he quit more than once. So he quit on Houston, gets traded to Brooklyn, goes to Brooklyn. They had a nice little run. James Harden, his first few games in Brooklyn, maybe 20, 30 games in Brooklyn, he was doing great, putting up great stats. Brooklyn's winning. And someone asked him, well, do you think you'd be in the running for MVP the way you're playing right now? James Harden announced, he said this to the media person, asked him the question. He said, I am the MVP. So here's James Harden again, campaigning for awards. And then what happens? He gets injured. The Nets end up not winning against Milwaukee in the playoffs that year, and that was 2021. Milwaukee goes on to win the championship. Next year, there's injuries, there's suspensions, all kinds of stuff that happened in Brooklyn. Finally, James Harden quits. Now, allegedly, what happened is he was working out with Kyrie in the offseason. Kyrie told James Harden that he was washed. And James Harden is he's semi-washed. He's not fully washed. He's semi-washed because he can't do what he was doing in Houston anymore. He doesn't have the burst anymore. He can't get to the rim the same way anymore. He can't beat people off the dribble as easily as he used to. Therefore, it's harder for him to get his outside shot going because players don't have to play off of him as much because they don't have that quickness. So Kyrie said he was washed, and James Harden is semi-washed. So that it was some truth to what Kyrie said, allegedly. And then James Harden got mad, and that's why he wanted out of Brooklyn, not because Kyrie got suspended. What the hell does James Harden care? James Harden goes to strip clubs in Vegas during off days. So what the hell does he care about Kyrie getting suspended? He can't possibly be mad about that. So he gets traded to Philly for Ben Simmons, who basically quit basketball. So I understand the trade. I mean, it's better to have James Harden than to have Ben Simmons for the Sixers. However, Sixers had Ben Simmons, who was an asset at that time, still looked at it as an asset, even after his no-show against the Atlanta Hawks in the playoffs that year. And the Sixers could have got a lot of different people. There was C.J. McCollum's name was floated out there. Damian Lillard's name was floated out there, even though Dame had repeatedly said he didn't want to leave. Bradley Beal was floated out. He had gotten injured. Maybe we got Bradley Beal. The Pacers offered Halliburton and I believe Sabonis, both of them together in a Ben Simmons package. The Sixers didn't take that because they now had Daryl Morey as the GM. Daryl Morey wanted to kind of recreate this Houston team. Why? Because the Houston team failed. So why he wanted to recreate Houston, who knows? But the Sixers ownership hired him, and he wanted James Harden. So he goes and gets his guy, James Harden. And James Harden comes to Philly. And when he first got traded to Philly, I said, I don't like James Harden. I've never been a James Harden fan personally. I'm not a fan of James Harden. I respect what he's done. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame because of what he's done, but I'm not a fan of him because James Harden is and has always been what I call a stats player. And I'm going to get to that in a second. They traded him to Sixers. And the reason I didn't like James Harden being on the Sixers is not because James Harden can't do something. Again, we traded Ben Simmons for him. So going from Ben Simmons to James Harden is an upgrade. Or even if you don't like James Harden, it's still an upgrade. You got to admit that. Because Ben Simmons is a zero right now. So James Harden comes, and the reason I didn't like it is because he was pairing up with Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is a guy who could be a great, amazing player. I don't think he's a great and amazing player. I think he's a very good player. He's obviously a talented player and a skilled player. He does good stuff. But Joel Embiid does not seem like he is committed 100% to being as good as he can be at basketball for one simple thing. Joel Embiid has never been in shape. This dude's been in the NBA for I don't know how many years now. Counting the years that he was injured, 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. This dude's never been in shape. How do you play basketball for a living? You got one job and you can't even get in shape. You're a professional athlete. You're not in shape. It's ridiculous. Makes no sense. Now he's teaming up with James Harden, a guy who is maybe 1 or 2 years. He's been in amazing shape, not always really in great shape. And James Harden being a stats guy, a guy who always talks about his stats and he talks about his I'm MVP and campaigns for individual awards. Teaming up with Joel Embiid, he's going to have influence over this guy. And my first fear with Joel Embiid teaming up with Harden is that Harden is going to influence Embiid to start thinking like he does. And now you got two guys who are thinking about their stats and about individual awards. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Joel Embiid starts going on this campaign that he should be MVP, or they're disrespecting me, or I feel like they don't like me. I should win MVP. I'm MVP. I feel like I'm the MVP. That's all he's talking about is MVP. Notice you never hear Joel Embiid talking about, I want to win a championship. Never hear him say that. You ever heard Joel Embiid say, I want to win a championship? All Joel Embiid talks about is how he should be MVP, or at least up through this season. Now he got his MVP, so I don't know what he's going to say next year because he already got his MVP. But this is all this guy talks about. And it was influenced by a guy like James Harden, who all he talks about is his stats and his individual abilities and what he's done and what he's accomplished. So they influenced each other. Now you got this guy campaigning for the award. He wins the award, campaigned and cried for the award, literally, wins the award. Now they get to play against Boston. They're up 3-2. James Harden has what he's got in that series. Sixers won 3 games. James Harden had 2.5 good games. They win 3 of them. They're up 3-2 against Boston. They blow game 6 at home, which they should have won. Then they go to game 7 and get stomped out. Joel Embiid is getting isolated on by Boston. They're going after him. They start picking on him in the second half of the game. Jason Tatum scores 51 points. A lot of them coming in Joel Embiid's face because Joel Embiid couldn't come outside and guard Jason Tatum. Now, this is the MVP of the league getting picked on by somebody on the other team, which makes no sense. How you an MVP? You're getting picked on by anybody on the other team, even if that other guy's an all-star, which Jason Tatum is, all-NBA guy. You're getting picked on. He scores 51 points on you and your team. You're supposed to be this great defender in Game 7. Joel Embiid looks tired in Game 7. He's out of shape at the end of Game 7 in the playoff series. Only the second round. So even if they have won, they still had 2 more rounds. This dude's out of shape. How you out of shape already in the second round of the playoffs? And you're allegedly the best player in the league. That's what the MVP is, right? Effectively the best player in the league that particular season. He gets tired. They lose Game 7. At the end of Game 7, or after Game 7's over, 51 points, Jason Tatum, by the way. Joel Embiid had, 15 points and 8 rebounds. Not a very good game. Didn't shoot well. James Harden did absolutely nothing in that game. Did 0 in the game. The 2 of them combined scored 26 points. Jason Tatum had twice as many points as both of them put together. These are 2 guys with MVP awards. 2 guys that campaign for individual awards all the time. They had 26 points combined in a Game 7. 2 guys with MVPs. And they get doubled up by one dude on the other team in a Game 7 when they were already up 3-2 in this series. This is a complete failure, and there's no other way to talk about this. So then the post-game press conference, I saw some of what Joel Embiid said. One of the things that Joel Embiid said was that, is a team sport. No, we can't do everything. Me and James can't do everything. Other people had to do stuff too. I'm looking at it like, and then what's crazy is none of the reporters in the room questioned him on this. Nobody said, what do you mean y'all can't do everything? Y'all didn't do anything. You had 15 points and 8 rebounds. Your season average was like 31 and 11, 12. You had 15 and 8, dude. You underperformed your own standards. You didn't do everything. You did very far from everything in this game. James Harden did nothing in this game. What are you talking about? We can't do everything. The way he framed it. When players say that, I played basketball. So when players say stuff like that, it's kind of like they're saying, well, I did my job. Everybody else got to do their job. Like, dude, you didn't do your job. He didn't do his job. And nobody questioned him on that. And I have seen some reporters talk about it a little bit, but these days, because sports journalism is on life support, many journalists won't call people out on their nonsense. And this was some nonsense that this dude said. Nobody called him out on it. Not as many people called him out as would have, let's say, had this happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The sports journalists just have no backbone these days because everybody wants to be friends with everybody and nobody wants to be attacked on social media or shunned, or they won't be granted interviews and all this kind of stuff. So everything is so soft these days because nobody is actually going to call people out on their bullshit. That was some bullshit what he said. This dude campaigned for your award, got your award, didn't show up in a Game 7. You're not in game shape. All you do is play basketball. You only got one job. All you do is play basketball. You can't even get in shape. You've been in the NBA for how many years now? You can't even get in shape. But you're campaigning that you're the best. You should be getting a trophy individually. And then after the game say, we can't do everything. Well, we know that. You ain't do your own job, let alone everybody else's job in a Game 7. And this is just getting, for the most part, looks like it's probably just going to get swept under the rug and people aren't going to talk about it. People will talk about it, but not publicly, not the way that I am. People, especially with a platform as sports journalists, because they'll get attacked for going at this guy. Now, let's remember what your guy Kendrick Perkins and other people on ESPN, and they're the most popular platform, talked about why he should be MVP this year because, well, it's not right that Jokic gets 3 awards in a row, and does he really deserve it? And a bunch of people voted for Embiid based on that argument because it was very close between him and Jokic, and maybe some people threw Giannis in there. Now look at it. Now, we understand it's a regular season award. The award goes to whoever had the best regular season. Joel did have a great regular season. And Jokic wasn't campaigning nor really trying to get the MVP. But he probably wasn't trying to get it the previous 2 seasons either. But looking back at it now, at the way that this dude just flamed out again in the playoffs, what it shows is in Philadelphia. And I heard this guy named Mike Lombardi, who's mostly an NFL guy, but he's based in Philadelphia. He was on the Bill Simmons podcast, and he was talking about this, and he was spot on. There's very little accountability happening in Philadelphia. There's no accountability because if this guy Joel Embiid has never been in great shape. If you've never been in great shape, somebody on the team, the organization, not the players, but the organization should come to you and be like, yo, we're giving you a max contract or whatever we're going to do. We're going to get behind you in this campaign so you can get your little trophy, your MVP award. Get in shape. Get in game shape. All right, is that too much to ask of you as a professional basketball player for you to be in game shape? He hasn't been in game shape his whole career. His whole career, this dude has never been in game shape. And they're campaigning to help him win trophies. It doesn't make any sense because there's no accountability there. There's nobody holding him accountable and nobody willing to hold him accountable. And they've let him do it for so long. Now it'll be damn near impossible to hold him accountable. Then you bring Daryl Morey, who's the ultimate enabler. He's the James Harden enabler. Enabled James Harden to do all these things that he did in Houston, putting up stats, doing whatever he wanted to do. He put up great stats, James Harden, and then didn't get over the hump, never got the team over the hump. Why would Daryl Morey want him again? Why? Why do you want to do this again? For what? I mean, you saw him at his best in Houston. Why would you want him again now? What's he going to do now that he wasn't doing then? Nothing, obviously. We can see that. So Daryl Morey is an enabler. He goes and gets his favorite guy to enable, his favorite enablee, if that's even a word, and James Harden teams these two guys up, and you see exactly what happens. Both these guys quit when it mattered. They got stomped out and quit in Game 7 against Boston, just completely folded. And Doc Rivers, again, he's going to take the blame for it, but this really goes to the front office, which is not the coaching staff. It's the front office, which is the ownership. Somebody in ownership should have gone to Joel Embiid years ago and been like, okay, you need to get in actual game shape. Look at a team like the Miami Heat, where they got this whole thing, Heat culture. Is that a real thing? I am believing now that it's a real thing. What we've seen this postseason is a real thing. Those guys are always in shape. They are a mean team. They're a tough team. They're a mentally tough team. They're a physically tough team. And you never see anybody playing for the Heat who's not in shape. And if you're not in shape, you ain't playing. All right, when Dwayne Wade was on the team, Chris Bosh, LeBron James, if they weren't in shape, they weren't playing. And you look at the players who are on the team now, all those dudes are in shape. They're tough. They're mentally tough, physically tough. They play hard. They're a mean, nasty team. None of that quitting shit. Like if the Heat are in the conference final, let's say the Sixers have won. Let's say the Sixers have beat Boston and they went to play the Heat. I wouldn't be surprised the Heat beat them again because last year they beat them in the second round. The Heat, I went to the game in Philly because I'm from Philly. So I visited Philly around this time last year, and I went to game 4, and the Sixers tied it up 2-2. That was one of the maybe 2 good games James Harden had in that series. This is the way it works. James Harden has like 2 good games out of every 5. He played good in that game 4. The Sixers won game 4. They went up. They tied it 2-2. Then the Heat went and won game 5 in Miami, came back to Philly and smashed the Sixers in game 6. And that was pretty much it. It would have happened the same way this year. I mean, Joel Embiid was on the team last year, wasn't he? Wasn't he? Same team. All right, only thing Heat are missing Tyler Hero, but don't seem to matter, right? They in the conference finals again. So they would have beat the Sixers again because the Sixers are just mentally weak. And the reason this team is mentally weak is not because all the players are weak, because their 2 best players are weak. Your leaders set the tone for everybody else on the team. James Harden is a leader on the team, whether he wants to be. James Harden is not a leader. He's not a leader, but he is looked at as a leader so a leader meaning with a capital A. A leader means this person's a leader anywhere that they go. They're going to lead because of their way that they carry themselves. James Harden is a leader with a lowercase a just because of his talent and his skill set. And he probably has a max contract, I'm guessing, and because of the stats that he puts up and his background. He has MVP, all-star. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's a leader with a lowercase a because of his resume. Joel Embiid, the same thing. He's a leader because of how good he is and because of his resume. But is he an actual leader? No, he is not. That's why when Jimmy Butler was on the Sixers, he was the leader. As soon as he got there, he was the leader. Why? Because Jimmy Butler is a leader with a capital A, whereas James Harden and Joel Embiid are leaders by default just because of their skill set. Sixers leader was probably PJ Tucker. He's probably the leader on the team, and he's of their starting 5. It was Harden, Maxey, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, and PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker probably is clearly, actually not probably, but clearly the least talented player in the starting 5. And he was the leader of the team. That's not going to work. Usually, that's not going to work. Usually, that's not going to work. Your best player, your most skilled player, the guy with the most stats, when they're the leader, that team's probably going to be pretty good. Jimmy Butler. Look at Michael Jordan. Look at who's another player where they're a leader. You look at somebody like even Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Teams that compete. LeBron James over in LA. The best player needs to be a leader with a capital A. Those are teams that have a chance to compete for a championship. Doesn't mean they're always going to win, but they give themselves a chance because the best player is a leader. Joel Embiid is not a leader. He is a very skilled player, not a leader. James Harden we already know he ain't a leader. All right, forget about that. We ain't got to talk about that guy. But the lack of accountability that the Sixers have and the fact that they're letting this guy skate by. And I remember when Ben Simmons quit basketball. and he tried to blame the Sixers. Joel Embiid's Joel Embiid's, what do they call it? His approval rating was at an all-time high at that point because there was this juxtaposition between Ben Simmons, basically, not passing when he had the open dunk against the Hawks, and then Joel Embiid. It seemed like he did everything he could. Really, he didn't, because they blew that series too. And Joel could have closed that series out before they even got to that point in the Game 7. His approval rating was at an all-time high because you're comparing him to Ben Simmons, who quit. All right, at least he didn't quit. At least he was still playing. Now look at him. All right, now look at this situation. All right, he hasn't really improved at all. Joel Embiid hasn't improved. I mean, he's the same player. Very good player. I'm not saying he's not good. He hasn't improved. And a player is you're supposed to get better year over year. This guy hasn't gotten better. He's doing the same stuff. Only thing that happened this year, as opposed to other years, is that he campaigned harder for the MVP, and more people came around to it because of the power of repetition and the fact that Jokic had won 2 in a row. People are like, does he really deserve, quote unquote, deserve to get 3 MVPs in a row? The fact that he was even in the conversation says a lot about what Jokic is doing. But this is where I'm at with the Philadelphia 76ers. So it was very, any of you who's a diehard Sixers fan, I'm a Sixers fan. I ain't diehard, but I'm a fan. I'm a fan of people actually showing up and performing as professionals. I'm a fan of people living up to certain standards. I'm a fan of self-accountability. I'm a fan of everybody being held to a certain bar of performance. And I don't feel like Joel Embiid even lived up to his own bar of performance, because, again, he campaigned as, I'm the MVP. All right, play like one. He didn't do it. When it got to the playoffs, he did not do it. That's just period, end of story. James Harden, again, this is not new with him. We already knew this about him. He showed us who he really is. And anybody who was fooled by anything that's happened since he left Houston, I don't know why. The guy hasn't changed. Now, he just played on different teams. He's still very good at basketball. I ain't saying he ain't good, but do I want him on the team that I'm cheering for to win the championship? No, because you can't depend on him. When you get to a close, tight game, James Harden does the same thing every time. We have enough evidence of this to know it. And now we got to put Joel Embiid in the same boat as him, and they influenced each other. So it turns out Jimmy Butler was right to leave the Sixers, because the Sixers, and this is another thing I want to say about that. When Jimmy Butler left the Sixers, he had the whole thing. Y'all might have saw that clip where he said, Tobias Harris over me, after they beat the Sixers last year. It wasn't just Tobias Harris. Ben Simmons didn't like playing with Jimmy Butler, because Jimmy Butler was a guy who held people accountable. Ben Simmons was a guy who didn't want to be held accountable. He was getting a big contract, or he might have already had his big contract. Ben Simmons, that is. Didn't want Jimmy on the team. Sixers bowed to Ben and let Jimmy go so they could sign Tobias Harris and Al Horford, by the way, who also they signed that offseason after they lost to Toronto, for a combined like $360 million between the two of them. Al Horford, Tobias Harris. Why? Because Tobias Harris seems like a quiet, nice, affable guy who gets along with everybody. When you watch the Sixers game, do you even notice that Tobias Harris is on the court? No, you don't even notice that he's there. I watched a bunch of Sixers games. I've been to Sixers games. You don't even notice that he's there. You don't even notice the dude. They picked him instead of Jimmy Butler. Every time Jimmy Butler plays, I notice him. He has an impact on the game. Tobias Harris is not an impact player. He's a good player. He's not an impact player. So Jimmy Butler wanted to be with some accountability. Him and Joel seem to like each other. If Jimmy had been Joel's teammate, his all-star teammate, instead of fucking James Harden, I think Joel Embiid would have a whole lot better career and get a lot more results than he's getting playing with James Harden, who is a guy who fails in the big moments over and over again in his career. Now, he's going to go into the Hall of Fame. That's not going to be on his Hall of Fame plaque when he goes in, that he fails in big moments. But any of us who has watched his career, we all can see this. I'm not making this up. Am I? If I am, somebody can let me know. So this is where I'm at with the Sixers. It's disappointing as a person who's from Philadelphia. I want to see the hometown team be good. And maybe I would have went to a game to see the Sixers against the Heat in the conference finals. But there is no Sixers versus Heat in the conference finals, because the Sixers got eliminated in Game 7 with that flop. So y'all let me know what y'all think about anything that I said here. Did I get anything wrong? Do I have everything right here? Would Jimmy Butler be a much better teammate for Joel Embiid than James Harden? Even though Jimmy Butler is not a quote-unquote shooter, he doesn't quote-unquote space the floor. That was their excuse for getting Tobias Harris instead of keeping Jimmy Butler. Has it made a difference? They're the same team, still losing in the second round, just like they did to Toronto. How many years ago was that? 4 years ago? They lost to Toronto in the second round. They still losing in the second round. So what difference did any of that make? They might as well have kept Jimmy Butler. They would have been a lot better team now than they've been over the years. And let Ben Simmons be mad that he was teamed up with Jimmy Butler. They could have traded him, got somebody who does space the floor. They could have did this whole thing a lot differently. But as they say, hindsight is 20/20. But I knew from the very beginning, as soon as they let Jimmy leave, And the next year, Jimmy's in the NBA Finals with the Miami Heat. And I'm like, wait a minute, they let this guy leave so they could sign fucking Tobias Harris, who you don't even notice, and Al Horford, who didn't do much on the Sixers. This is the wrong team for him for different reasons. But now he's back on the Celtics, beating them in the Game 7. How your backup beating you in the Game 7, Joel Embiid? You the MVP. He was your backup. They signed Al Horford to be the backup. Now he's beating you in the Game 7. All right, this is where I stand on the Sixers. Y'all let me know if I missed anything, if I got anything wrong, if I got anything right. And that's that. Work on your game.